A captured resource can often become a lens through which the true balance of power is revealed, and in this case, the seized 50,000 gallons of fuel did exactly that. To the soldiers who first laid eyes on it, the fuel seemed like a windfall, a lucky break that might buy time or create an opportunity. But when examined more carefully, that same stockpile exposed something far more significant: the vast disparity between what one side considered a major acquisition and what the other viewed as a routine supply. The colonel understood that while his forces celebrated this as a victory, the American military treated such quantities as ordinary, almost trivial. This contrast illuminated a painful truth about the war's trajectory. What appeared monumental to his struggling army was, in reality, the smallest fragment of the enemy's logistical flow. He began to recognize that power is not only expressed through battlefield maneuvers, but through the unnoticed systems that operate behind the scenes: production lines, fuel depots, transport trucks, naval convoys, airlift networks. The captured fuel symbolized the strength of an opponent whose resources were not just abundant, but replenishable, while his own nation was scraping the bottom of every barrel. Instead of weakening the enemy, the seizure highlighted how unfazed they would be by such a loss, how quickly and effortlessly they could replace it, and how deeply embedded their supply infrastructure was into every aspect of the war. In that moment, the colonel saw that the resource he thought he had taken from his adversary was actually a reflection of a broader imbalance, one defined not by the presence of fuel in the tanks, but by the capacity to refill them endlessly. The scale and efficiency of American logistics became unmistakably clear the moment the colonel studied the markings on the captured fuel containers. What initially appeared to be a significant haul soon revealed itself to be merely a small, replaceable component of a much larger, well-oiled system. Each drum carried precise codes indicating its origin, destination, expected use, and the timeline of its movement. These were not random supplies gathered in haste. They were part of a meticulously organized chain that stretched across oceans, factories, railroads, and military bases. The colonel understood that such detail was not accidental. It was the product of an industrial power that had mastered coordination across every layer of its military operations. As he examined the labels, shipping stamps, and delivery schedules, it became clear that the Americans were operating on a level of logistical sophistication his own forces could no longer match. This fuel shipment represented just one unit in an enormous supply stream, one that flowed with the reliability of a machine that never rested. Ships crossed the Atlantic with ton after ton of material, factories ran around the clock, and fleets of trucks delivered supplies with near-mathematical precision. In contrast, his own nation was enduring shortages, disruptions, and an ever-shrinking industrial base strained beyond its limits. What affected him most was the realization that this single captured load, celebrated enthusiastically by his troops, would barely be noticed by the enemy. It would not delay their operations, slow their tanks, or reduce their firepower. They would simply send another convoy, another train, another shipment because their system allowed it, their resources allowed it, and their momentum allowed it. The colonel saw with stark clarity that logistics were not just supporting the American war effort. They were driving it, powering it, and ensuring it would continue long after his own side had exhausted its final reserves. Wars are often remembered for dramatic battles and heroic maneuvers, but the deeper truth is that victory usually belongs to the side capable of sustaining the longest, most reliable flow of resources. In this situation, the colonel began to see that the war was no longer about individual tactical successes. It was about the massive, unseen systems that kept armies moving. Ammunition, food, spare parts, medicine, fuel, none of these elements were glamorous, yet all were essential. Without them, even the most skilled troops and brilliant strategies eventually collapse. His forces were fighting with dwindling supplies, stretching every ration, every liter of fuel, every usable part, while the opposing side was advancing with a steady stream of replenishment that never seemed to falter. The captured fuel did more than fire engines. It illuminated the harsh reality that endurance wins wars, not isolated strokes of luck or moments of bravery. The colonel realized that the American ability to replace resources almost instantly meant their army could operate at full strength day after day. Meanwhile, his own troops were experiencing the opposite: vehicles abandoned due to lack of fuel, artillery silent because shells had run out, planes grounded not from damage but from scarcity. These were not temporary issues. They were symptoms of a system that had reached its breaking point. He understood that a war supported by a powerful industrial engine becomes almost self-sustaining. Factories produce, ships deliver, trucks distribute, soldiers fight, and the cycle continues. Without such a structure, even the bravest forces eventually run out of the means to continue. The colonel's realization was not about the fuel itself, but about what it represented. The difference between an army surviving on hope and one thriving on a constant flow of supplies, momentum, and industrial strength. The moment the colonel watched his soldiers celebrate the captured fuel, he felt the divide between appearance and reality widen. To them, this moment symbolized triumph, confirmation that the tides might turn. But to him, it revealed something deeper: the difference between temporary success and true strategic strength. Tactical victories create excitement, but they do not guarantee long-term survival. Strategic strength is built on consistency, predictability, and the ability to maintain pressure without interruption. As he examined the fuel drums, he realized that their celebrations were misplaced, because the enemy's power did not lie in a single shipment of fuel. It lay in the capacity to send countless more. This fuel, though valuable, did not undermine the opponent in any meaningful way. It simply highlighted how much they could afford to lose without consequence. The Americans had constructed a war machine that did not depend on isolated deliveries, but on a vast network, integrated, efficient, and resilient. Their strength was not in the moment, but in the rhythm of their supply chain, in the way every system supported the next. A single disruption barely registered within such a structure. This understanding made the colonel realize that his army, lacking such depth, could not compete on the same terms. Every drum of fuel symbolized a larger imbalance. His own forces relied on chance opportunities and sporadic captures, while the enemy relied on predictable production, reliable transport, and overwhelming capacity. He understood that one side was fighting for moments, and the other was fighting with momentum. That momentum, once established, is almost impossible to stop. The colonel's insight was not about the physical fuel in front of him, but about the invisible machinery behind it. A machinery that guaranteed the enemy's endurance and exposed his own army's fragility. Lasting power is never defined by what one manages to seize in a fleeting moment, and the colonel understood this as he looked at the fuel his troops had captured. For his men, this windfall felt like strength, something real, something tangible. But he saw that true power is not built on sudden gains. It is built on the capacity to maintain a steady flow of resources, discipline, and energy over time. Anyone can be strong for a moment. What determines victory, survival, or resilience is the ability to remain strong long after the excitement fades. The fuel before him symbolized a temporary boost, but not a sustainable solution. As he reflected on the broader picture, he recognized that the enemy's power came from infrastructure and continuity. Their tanks did not rely on captured fuel. Their strategies did not depend on chance. Their confidence did not come from isolated victories, but from the knowledge that their supply chains would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Strength, he realized, is not the presence of fuel in one moment. It is the certainty that more fuel will always arrive. His own forces lacked that certainty. Every advance risked outpacing their supplies. Every retreat drained resources they could not replace. They were fighting with what they had left. The enemy was fighting with what they could produce endlessly. The colonel understood that the difference between desperation and dominance is the difference between hoping for opportunities and creating them. The enemy could push forward because their resources generated momentum. His side stalled because they were constantly fighting against scarcity. The captured fuel did not make them stronger. It reminded him that their strength was temporary. True power belongs not to those who succeed once, but to those who can sustain success, replenish their losses, and continue moving when others have stopped. Give me whole speech conclusion and goodbye thank you notes.